Families are supposed to be sanctuaries, places where you're allowed to grow up feeling loved, seen, and understood. A home where your spirit has space to breathe. But for many people raised inside narcissistic family systems, that kind of home never existed. Instead, it felt like living in a beautiful cage, polished on the outside but suffocating within. What makes a narcissistic family so uniquely painful isn't always the yelling or the overt cruelty. It's the distortion of love itself. It's how control hides behind smiles and how emotional survival becomes the invisible assignment every child must accept. In this episode, we're going beneath the surface to uncover how these families operate, how love is handed out like a prize for obedience, how emotions are manipulated, and how roles are assigned, not based on who you are, but on what the narcissistic parent needs you to be. You might already know these terms: the golden child, the scapegoat, the lost child. But they're more than labels. They're the invisible scripts that shape a child's reality and their identity long after childhood ends. A narcissistic family doesn't just mean having a difficult parent or going through a few dramatic holidays. It's a system that orbits entirely around one or more narcissistic individuals, often a parent who demands admiration, loyalty, and control. Not as a request, but as a condition for being safe, is unseen, or even loved. In these homes, appearance always outweighs authenticity. What matters is how the family looks from the outside, not how it feels on the inside. Obedience is praised. Honesty, especially emotional honesty, is punished. And the boundaries that normally help a child feel secure, they're usually ignored, dismissed, or bulldozed. At the heart of this dysfunction is a kind of emotional economy. Everything serves the narcissist's self-image. And in that system, each child becomes a character in a story that wasn't written for them. Some get raised up, others get crushed, but no one gets out unchanged. This dynamic doesn't announce itself. You don't get a pamphlet as a kid explaining that you're part of a dysfunctional system. Instead, you absorb the rules through every glance, silence, and reaction. And over time, those rules turn into the framework for your identity. That's why so many people raised in narcissistic homes carry a deep ache into adulthood, unsure of who they really are, unsure if their feelings are even valid. So let's begin this conversation by naming what a narcissistic family truly is. At its center is usually a parent, or sometimes both, who believe their feelings, image, and needs are the emotional axis of the household. They might seem confident, successful, or even self-sacrificing to the outside world. But behind closed doors, they operate from a deep, often unspoken insecurity. Their need to dominate the emotional atmosphere, to be admired and never challenged, quietly infects the entire household. This kind of parent doesn't view their children as separate beings. Not really. They see them as extensions of themselves, trophies, mirrors, or scapegoats. And love, it's doled out based on performance, on how well you uphold the fantasy they've built around themselves. Children who please them might be praised, held up as special. But the moment a child questions, resists, or expresses independence, the warmth vanishes. Praise turns to punishment. Smiles turn cold. And suddenly, you're no longer safe in your own home. Often these parents manipulate reality to keep their throne intact. They gaslight not just to confuse, but to control. They might pit siblings against each other through triangulation. And when things go wrong, the blame never lands on them. It's deflected, usually onto their children. In this kind of household, the emotional rules are always shifting. One day you're celebrated, the next you're discarded. And so the children learn to read the parents' moods like weather patterns, watching for signs of an incoming storm, adjusting their behavior in hopes of staying safe. Some narcissistic parents don't scream or criticize directly. They might seem nurturing or endlessly giving. But even that giving comes with strings. They might use guilt to control or make their child feel responsible for their emotional well-being. The message is always the same. My needs come first, and you exist to meet them. Over time, the family starts to look a certain way. Rigid roles, hollow conversations, performative closeness. Real emotional expression, it's buried. And the children, in one way or another, adapt. Not because it feels right, but because they have to survive. Now let's talk about one of those roles, the golden child. On the surface, this is the child who seems to have it all. They're praised, admired, sometimes even envied. They become the symbol of everything the narcissistic parent wants to project: success, charm, beauty, intelligence. But what most people don't see is that the golden child isn't free. They've been chosen not for who they are, but for how well they reflect the parent's fantasy. Maybe they're especially gifted, obedient, or just happen to be born first. Whatever the reason, their value becomes tied to performance. They're not praised for being themselves, they're praised for being useful. This child learns quickly that success equals safety. That praise is conditional. That failing, or even just being ordinary, threatens their place in the family hierarchy. So they perform, they strive, they shine. And beneath all of that is a growing fear that if they stop, they'll disappear. There's also guilt, because staying in that golden role often means ignoring the pain in the family, turning a blind eye to the scapegoated sibling, staying silent about the emotional manipulation, pretending everything's fine when it isn't. The golden child becomes both favored and trapped, living out someone else's dream while slowly losing sight of their own. And when they finally question it, when they try to pull away or speak up, the fall from grace can be brutal. Some golden children end up exiled, suddenly cast in the role of the scapegoat for daring to choose authenticity over loyalty. Others spend years chasing external success, never quite understanding why they still feel so empty. What's tragic is that the golden child was never loved for who they were. They were celebrated for being a mirror. And when they stop mirroring, when they choose to be real, they have to rebuild their identity from scratch. But the hardest truth is that even the golden child suffered. Just differently. Their mask was praise. But it was still a mask. And healing begins the moment they realize they no longer have to earn love. That being human, imperfect, and real is enough. If the golden child was the reflection, polished and praised, the scapegoat is the shadow that gets cast away. This is the child who somehow, without ever asking for it, becomes the one who absorbs all the blame, all the dysfunction, and all the anger that the narcissistic parent can't face within themselves. They become the target, the one who can't do anything right, the one whose mere presence seems to stir discomfort, resentment, or rage. But not because they're truly flawed. Often it's because they're different in a way that threatens the illusion, maybe more sensitive, more honest, more independent. Maybe they speak the truth too plainly or refuse to play along. And in a family built on denial and performance, truth is the most dangerous thing you can bring to the table. While the golden child props up the narcissist's idealized self-image, the scapegoat becomes the emotional trash bin, holding all the unwanted parts the narcissistic parent refuses to see in themselves. Their anger, their insecurity, their failures. The scapegoat becomes the projection screen for it all. This isn't a role the child chooses. It's one they're assigned, often from a very young age. And once it sticks, it can be nearly impossible to shake. Every mistake they make is exaggerated. Every success downplayed or ignored, and their pain dismissed. If they speak up, they're too sensitive. If they push back, they're disrespectful. The goal is always to make them question themselves, not the parent. And over time, many scapegoated children start to internalize the shame. They begin to believe that maybe they are the problem, that maybe if they were just easier, quieter, better, they'd finally be loved. It creates a painful cycle of self-blame and confusion. They crave approval, but can never quite earn it. They sense something is deeply wrong, but are told they're imagining it. And that gaslighting cuts deep. Ironically, though, the scapegoat is often the healthiest one in the family. They're the truth teller, the resistor, the one who sees the dysfunction clearly, even when everyone else is still pretending. And that clarity, though painful, becomes their strength. Because they're not lost in the fantasy, they're more likely to seek help, to question the system, and to begin healing on their own terms. But healing isn't easy. Many scapegoats grow up carrying wounds that bleed into adulthood: chronic self-doubt, a harsh inner critic, people-pleasing tendencies, or emotional numbness. Others go the opposite direction, becoming fiercely independent, mistrustful, and emotionally armored. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection has always meant pain. Still, the most powerful truth they can come to realize is this: they were never broken. They were just the mirror the family couldn't bear to look into. And then there's the one who vanishes altogether, the lost child, also called the invisible child. This is the sibling who gets overlooked, not because they're bad or outspoken, but because they've learned to disappear. They slip through the cracks of the family's emotional landscape, staying quiet, staying compliant, and most of all, staying safe by not being seen. They don't receive the spotlight like the golden child. They don't absorb the attacks like the scapegoat. Instead, they vanish into the background, emotionally neglected, rarely asked how they feel, and often treated like an afterthought. Their silence becomes their shield. These children often retreat into fantasy books, art, or imaginary worlds, anything that offers escape from the noise, the chaos, or the emptiness of their home life. They learn early that speaking up won't get them what they need, and might even invite punishment. So they stop asking, they stop expecting, and in doing so, they stop being known. But just because they're not the target doesn't mean they're untouched. The wound of being invisible is deep. It teaches a child that their needs don't matter, that their feelings are irrelevant, that they only deserve love if they stay out of the way. In adulthood, lost children often struggle with intimacy, not because they don't long for it, but because it feels foreign. They might be kind, gentle, even thoughtful, but inside, they carry a sense of disconnection, like they've never truly belonged anywhere, like they've been forgotten not just by their family, but by the world. Their healing begins when they realize that quiet isn't the same as peace, that disappearing isn't the same as being safe, and that they're allowed to take up space emotionally, relationally, spiritually. Reclaiming their voice, their desires, and their place in the world isn't selfish. It's necessary. And then there's the one who wears the smile like armor, the mascot, sometimes called the clown. This child figures out, consciously or not, that laughter is a kind of magic. That if they can make people laugh, if they can lighten the mood, maybe they can keep the chaos at bay. Maybe they can stay out of the line of fire. The mascot becomes the entertainer, the comic relief, the class clown, the one who can make everyone feel better without ever having to talk about what's wrong. On the surface, they seem carefree, funny, energetic. But underneath that humor is often a child who's terrified, who feels the dysfunction but doesn't have the words or power to change it. So they distract, they joke, they play the fool, and in return, they buy a little safety. But like every other role, the mascot comes with a price. Because when you're always performing, it's hard to be seen for who you really are. People might love your humor, your lightness, but they don't always see the sadness underneath, and sometimes neither do you. As adults, mascots often struggle to express serious emotions. Vulnerability feels unsafe. Sadness feels like failure. And so they stay on performing caretaking, keeping everyone smiling even when their own heart is breaking. Their healing begins when they realize they're allowed to stop, that they don't have to earn love by being funny or likable, that their worth isn't tied to keeping everyone else comfortable, and that beneath the jokes is a human being worthy of care, attention, and emotional truth. In narcissistic families, these roles can look fixed, but they're not. They shift. They evolve. A golden child might become the scapegoat the moment they express independence. A lost child might find their voice through humor, and become the mascot. Siblings might switch positions depending on the parent's mood or the family's needs. There's no safety in the role, just performance. But what each role has in common is that none of them are chosen. They are survival strategies, emotional armor shaped by the needs of a dysfunctional system. They aren't reflections of a child's character, they're reflections of the environment. And once you see that, you can begin to loosen the grip they have on your identity. Growing up in a narcissistic family doesn't just affect childhood. It shapes how you see the world long after you've left the house. These early roles, the golden child, the scapegoat, the lost child, the mascot, don't get left behind like old clothes. They sink into your nervous system, into your beliefs, into the way you move through life. At first, it's not obvious. Maybe you just feel off, unsure of who you are, or why you always seem to second-guess yourself. Maybe relationships feel hard or exhausting. Maybe you find yourself repeating the same patterns, giving too much, saying too little, or feeling like you're never quite enough, even when everything on paper looks fine. That's not random, that's the residue. Because in a narcissistic household, the emotional atmosphere is rarely safe. Love is conditional. Approval must be earned. And boundaries. They're either invisible or punished. So children adapt. They learn to disconnect from their true selves in order to survive. They read others' moods like a radar system. They hide parts of themselves. And over time, that hiding becomes habit. One of the deepest wounds that can come from this environment is a fragmented sense of self. You grow up not really knowing who you are, only who you're supposed to be. You learn how to perform the version of yourself that's safest in the system. The good one, the funny one, the quiet one, the strong one, but not necessarily the real one. And so as adults, many survivors carry around this quiet confusion. An aching sense that something is missing and they don't know what it is. They may look for validation in external success, in perfectionism, in people-pleasing. But nothing fills the void. Because the thing they're missing is themselves. Another common pattern is emotional suppression. If expressing needs sadness or anger led to rejection or punishment in childhood, you learn quickly that feelings are dangerous. You either shut them down completely or become hyper-attuned to everyone else's always watching, always adjusting, always trying to avoid conflict. This leads to emotional numbness, chronic anxiety, or a haunting fear that being fully known will get you hurt. Some people become masters of detachment, always calm, always fine, never too much. Others become emotional caretakers, absorbing the moods of everyone around them, often without realizing it. Relationships, too, are shaped by these dynamics. Many adult children of narcissists end up in partnerships that mirror what's familiar, not what's healthy. They might be drawn to controlling people, emotionally unavailable partners, or situations where they feel they have to earn love. All over again. Not because they want to suffer, but because part of them believes that's just how love works. Sometimes they become the fixers, the rescuers, the ones who try to heal everyone else as a way to earn their place. Other times, they disappear emotionally, never letting anyone get too close. Boundaries are either too rigid or non-existent. Trust feels foreign. Vulnerability feels dangerous. And then there's the shame, the quiet guilt that never seems to leave, the feeling that everything bad was somehow your fault, even if you know logically it wasn't. That shame can stick to even the happiest moments, promotions, celebrations, love. You feel like you should be happy. But underneath there's a whisper, you don't deserve this. Even healing can trigger that voice. You take a step forward, set a boundary, speak your truth, ask for help. And suddenly the guilt flares up. Because for so long, staying small was safer. Speaking up meant punishment. And so, even freedom can feel like danger at first. But here's the truth. None of this is who you are. These are patterns you adapted to survive. These are responses, not flaws. And they can be unlearned. Healing begins with recognition, not fixing everything overnight, but simply seeing, naming, realizing that the roles you played weren't choices, that the coping mechanisms you developed were signs of intelligence, resilience, and courage. You survived by becoming what the system demanded. But now, you get to become something else. You get to become yourself. One of the most powerful tools in this journey is therapy, especially forms that are trauma-informed, like innerchild work or EMDR. These approaches don't just talk about the past. They help you feel it, process it, and release the grip it has on your body and mind. They reconnect you with the parts of yourself that got buried, the parts that are still waiting to be seen. Another piece of healing is self-parenting. That means learning to offer yourself the care, protection, and validation you never received. It's not about blaming your parents forever. It's about re-raising the parts of you that were neglected. It's about saying, I see you now, and I'll keep you safe. This can look like setting boundaries even when it feels terrifying. It can mean allowing yourself to grieve not just what happened, but what never did. The hugs that didn't come, the words you never heard, the safety you should have had. Grief isn't weakness, it's truth. And truth is what sets you free. You might also find healing in community, in the quiet magic of being witnessed by someone who understands, in a book that speaks your story, in a support group where no one asks you to explain why it still hurts. Feeling seen without judgment, without performance, is profoundly healing. Because for so long you had to hide, and now you don't. Ultimately, healing isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole, about stepping out of the role you were assigned and stepping into the person you truly are. Someone worthy, someone real, someone who never had to earn love in the first place. You are not your role, not the golden child, not the scapegoat, not the invisible one, not the clown. You are a human being who adapted to survive. And now you get to choose something different. The dysfunction of the narcissistic family system thrives on silence, on confusion, on unspoken rules and invisible expectations. But the moment you name it, the moment you say, "This wasn't okay," the spell begins to break. You don't have to keep playing your old part. You don't have to stay inside the emotional blueprint you were handed. You can write a new one. Healing from a narcissistic family system isn't about erasing what happened. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that were silenced, reshaped, or forgotten in the process of surviving. It's about finding the version of yourself that never had permission to fully exist and giving them room to breathe. For so many survivors, the journey doesn't begin with a bold declaration. It begins in quiet recognition, a moment where something finally makes sense. A sentence in a book, a conversation with a friend, a video like this one. And suddenly the pieces start falling into place. The confusion that wrapped around your childhood begins to unravel, not with blame, but with clarity. That moment is powerful, because once you start seeing the patterns, they lose some of their grip. The invisible rules that used to shape your every decision. You can start rewriting them. Not all at once, not perfectly, but piece by piece, truth by truth. Therapy helps deeply, especially trauma-informed work that honors the complexity of your story, the layers, the wounds, the roles you had to play. Inner child work lets you reconnect with the younger version of yourself, the one who was scared or unseen or made responsible for things far too big. EMDR can gently reprocess the pain stored in your nervous system. You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to rush. Another part of healing, maybe the most overlooked, is self-repair. That means becoming the parent you needed, not in some abstract motivational sense, but in real, tangible ways. It's asking, how can I care for myself today? Like someone who matters. It's building a relationship with yourself that isn't based on performance or perfection or punishment, but presence. Sometimes that means saying no. Sometimes it means letting yourself cry, even if you don't know exactly why. Other times, it means holding space for your anger, the righteous kind, the kind that says, "That wasn't fair," because it wasn't. And pretending it was doesn't make it hurt less. Honoring your anger is a way of honoring yourself. Grief is part of this too. And it runs deep. You might grieve a childhood you never had, parents who never really saw you, moments that should have felt safe but didn't. That grief doesn't mean you're stuck in the past. It means you're finally telling the truth about it. And truth is the foundation of healing. Some survivors find community people who've walked a similar path, who speak your unspoken thoughts out loud. That kind of validation is rare. And it's sacred, because when you've spent your life questioning your reality, hearing someone say, "Me too," can feel like oxygen. Others find healing through creativity, writing, painting, music. Anything that gives shape to the things you were never allowed to say. Because silence is where narcissistic systems thrive. Expression is how we push back. But what matters most is this healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means remembering who you were before you were told to be someone else. It means removing the mask, not to reveal a perfect face underneath, but to reconnect with something softer, truer. You. That takes time. And it's not always linear. There will be days where you feel strong, clear, empowered. And there will be days where the old roles whisper again, where the guilt creeps in, where your progress feels invisible. That's okay. Healing is a spiral, not a straight line. Every loop brings you deeper into your truth. And truth is what frees you. Breaking free from a narcissistic family doesn't always mean cutting ties. For some it does, and that's a valid choice. For others, it means redefining relationships, setting limits, or emotionally detaching, even when physical distance isn't possible. What matters is this. You get to decide what keeps you safe now. You get to decide what family means going forward. That might mean setting boundaries, even when your voice shakes. It might mean disappointing people who were never invested in your wholeness. It might mean being misunderstood by those still caught in the system. And yes, it might be lonely at first. But it's an honest kind of loneliness, the kind that makes room for real connection to grow. You're not here to perform anymore. Not for their love, not for their approval, not to keep their version of the story alive. You're here to live your own. Because here's the truth, they never told you you were never broken. You were adapting. You were surviving. You were smart enough, sensitive enough, and strong enough to find a way through. And now you're allowed to thrive. You're allowed to ask hard questions. You're allowed to name the dysfunction, even if they never will. You're allowed to feel angry, or sad, or lost, or free. You're allowed to build something new, not in spite of where you came from, but because you finally chose yourself. You are not the role you were cast in. You are not the reflection of someone else's wounds. You are not responsible for maintaining a fantasy that cost you your own reality. You are your own person. Your voice matters. Your needs matter. Your truth matters. So whether you were the golden child trying to stay perfect so love wouldn't disappear, whether you were the scapegoat punished for seeing too clearly, whether you were the lost child forgotten in the background, or the mascot hiding pain behind laughter, you are no longer required to stay in that role. You get to be whole. You get to be real. You get to be free. And if you're still in the middle of the mess, still waking up to these realizations, still unsure how to feel, still trying to believe this healing is meant for you, let this be your reminder. It is. You're not too late. You're not too much. You're not alone. The journey out of a narcissistic family system begins with seeing the truth, but it continues with one small act of compassion after another, one choice, one boundary, one breath at a time. This healing is not about proving yourself. It's about finding yourself. So take your time, speak your truth. And when the old roles whisper, remember, they were survival strategies, not your identity. You don't have to carry the weight of their brokenness anymore. You are allowed to be light. Thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling. Your story matters. Your healing is valid. And your voice, the one that was silenced for too long, it's welcome here. You're not who they told you to be. You're who you choose to become. And that is everything.